And I am very excited today to welcome Scott Horton back to the show. He's an author, podcast host. Absolutely check out his new podcast with Daryl Cooper, Provoked. This week, they had on Glenn Greenwald to talk about the John Bolton indictment. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen Glenn so happy, Scott. So that was a really fun interview to watch. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm sorry for being so bald, but happy to be here with you.
No, you look great, Scott. I got quite a bit I want to talk to you about today. Trump was apparently a little bit mad at Benjamin Netanyahu. Is the ceasefire in Gaza over? And I think, fortunately, we see Trump rejecting tomahawks to Ukraine. So, first up, Scott, there was this pretty interesting clip. This is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. These are probably two of the closer people personally to Donald Trump in or around the administration. And this is what they had to say about Donald Trump's reaction to Netanyahu's attempt to assassinate Hamas leadership in Qatar.
We woke up the next morning to find out that there had been this attack. Wow. And of course, I was called by the president.
You had no idea, obviously.
None whatsoever. You know, I think both Jared and I felt...
Hey, Chris, I can't hear this audio.
I just feel we felt a little bit betrayed.
Now, I had heard that the president, that he was furious.
I think he felt like the Israelis were getting a little bit out of control in what they were doing, and that it was time to be very strong and stop them from doing things that he felt were not in their long-term interests.
People should understand that Netanyahu, the Israelis, bombed the peacemakers, bombed the negotiating team.
And by the way, Leslie, it had a metastasizing effect because the Qataris were critical to the negotiation, as were the Egyptians and the Turks. And we had lost the confidence of the Qataris.
Right.
And so Hamas went underground, and it was very, very difficult to get to them. And
they were your link to Hamas.
Absolutely.
You were dealing through the Qataris to make your proposals to Hamas.
And it became very, very evident as to how important and how critical that role was.
So, Scott, what do you make of these remarks from Kushner and Witkoff? Do you think Trump's actually a little upset with Netanyahu?
Well, I don't know necessarily about upset, but I believe their story there. I think that's right. And, I had read a piece in Haaretz by their editor-in-chief. I'm sorry, I forget the guy's name, Ben something, I think. He was the editor-in-chief of Haaretz, and he didn't cite sources or whatever, but he just stated as a flat fact that what happened was Trump got pissed off when Netanyahu bombed Qatar. And not only did he try to kill all the Hamas negotiators, he missed. So it was this, giant diplomatic crisis that he caused with an American ally for no gain. And at that point, he decided it was time to rein them in. And as the editor of Haaretz put it, as per tradition, where the Americans, that is Washington, D.C., doesn't care, as he put it, what we do to the Palestinians. But we can't mess with America's order in the rest of the Middle East. And so when it comes to America's relationship with these other states, we can't go intervening like that, or else the hammer comes down. And he cited a few historical examples, and including this one. So, one thing I would ask you, if I could turn around and interview you for a second, is I've heard this a couple of times, but I haven't seen any direct sources cited about, but I have seen a couple times people sort of either directly saying or heavily implying that Trump had threatened Netanyahu with withholding money and had told him, look, man, I will cut you off. I'm serious about this, because Netanyahu had, I guess, attempted to sort of blow him off at first. But I wonder if you had heard that, or if you know about that. I'd like to really track that down. I don't know. Even if the New York Times don't mean it's true, but I'd like to see what the source was for that, if you know what it was.
Yeah, I haven't read that anywhere. I would assume if something like that happened, I would hear about it from Brock Ravid and Axios, but I don't think I have read him saying anything like that. One of the interesting, I guess, dynamics here, Scott, is the best interpretation of what happened, because some people would say this was basically a giveaway for Hamas. They gave up all the hostages up front. Israel has killed a Palestinian every single day. I think Dave DeCamp wrote today at antiwar.com. Israel has killed 80 Palestinians since the ceasefire went into effect. They've also dug up the bodies of a few hundred Palestinians. So the death toll has gone up quite a bit in Gaza over the past 10 days. But that the best interpretation of what happened here is Trump really did get mad at Netanyahu over the Qatari strikes. There's all these business ties. Witkoff and Kushner seem to be two people kind of tied in business ties with the Middle East. I think Kushner's financial service, I forget what exactly they do, but they receive investments heavily from the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. And so I guess, is this kind of what you're thinking here, that the Trump administration is legitimately upset with Netanyahu? Maybe not mad, maybe not upset, but at least they've said, okay, we got to do something here because it's just gone on too far if they're actually attacking the Qataris. This is going to jeopardize our personal business interests in the Middle East. Not only, I think the Qataris had said they're going to invest like $1.2 trillion in the United States, actually, trillion with a T.
Well, that certainly, working backwards here, that is completely preposterous. Anytime you hear numbers like that, Donald Trump, you might remember in his first term, he said, the Saudis agreed to buy $400 billion worth of weapons from us. Yeah, over the next 40 years. Get the hell out of here, But it's funny, Kyle, I guess I really don't know, but it's funny to think that, thank goodness that Jared Kushner has business interests with the Arabs, not just with the Israelis. So he has his own, oil versus Israel conflict built in his own, business life. Fine with me, I guess. You know what I mean? I'll settle for that. If he's got to, for his own selfish reasons, he has to think about the Saudis' position and all this and not just the Israelis. I don't know if that really has anything to do with it or not, but I do think that it was quite a step for Netanyahu to go ahead and try to assassinate the negotiating team there. So I guess, like I was saying, it made sense to me the way that Haaretz editor-in-chief had written it, that this is sort of in keeping with American tradition, that they'll let the Israelis do whatever they want to the Palestinians. But if you're going to mess with Egypt or Jordan or Turkey or Iraq or Saudi or UAE or Qatar or Iran or somebody, then you better check in and get permission first. Better make sure that you're not screwing with America's plans. After all, they did drag America into the war with Iran, but then again, Trump didn't really seem to mind that too much. I think they had already probably had a tacit agreement about that in the first place. Whereas the Qatar thing, I think, was probably more of a fait accompli, ask for forgiveness later kind of thing. And it makes sense to me that Trump said, all right, time to start reeling them in here,
Yeah. Yeah. So, Scott, I want to ask you next about the ceasefire. We've had these pretty crazy events over the past 48 hours where Israel reported there was a major Hamas ceasefire violation. Some Hamas militants have fired multiple RPGs at an Israeli bulldozer, maybe at multiple points where there are IDF soldiers in Gaza. Very interesting. It seems that it leaked to both Ryan Grimm at Dropside News, which would be more, independent left wing, and Kurt Mills at TAC, who's independent leaning right wing, right? That the Trump administration knew right away that isn't what happened, that there was a unexploded Israeli bomb that a bulldozer hit. I've heard reports that 2 Israeli soldiers or contractors were killed in the bulldozer, and then Israel went and bombed anyways. And when Trump, told Netanyahu that, hey, we know what happened here, then Israel went ahead and said, okay, we'll knock it off and go back to the ceasefire. So, kind of, is that maybe a little bit more proof here that the Trump is not going to just let Netanyahu walk all over him?
I hope so. I mean, I have to say, as I know that you have perceived here, that essentially, and I think they stated this outright, that Hamas, they climbed down on a lot of their demands, like most importantly, that Israel has to completely leave the strip and all that. And the reason why is because they just placed their bets with Trump, that Trump has just swore to them. He made such tall promises to them that the war is really over and he's going to keep Israel reined in. And they decided to place their bets on that. Now, obviously, Netanyahu has no intent on abiding by that. He still wants to kill as many Palestinians as he has to in order to get the rest to leave. And so that has not changed from their point of view. The question is just how far, how much, leash Donald Trump is going to allow at this point. And of course, look, and everybody should be real honest about this. There's going to keep being bulldozers running over undetonated ordnance in the ground. There's going to always be a new pretext you can always get, it doesn't even have to be a false flag, but you could have an Israeli agent inside the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine or Egyptian Islamic, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We've had this before where Palestinian Islamic Jihad fired off a couple rockets and Netanyahu bombed the crap out of Hamas and said, well, they should have kept those other guys under leash where they even acknowledged they knew that Hamas was doing everything they could to prevent rogue actors. This is years past, but not too many years back. But so the Israelis will always be able to find a pretext to seize on, if for, the sound of a rifle report would be enough for them to do whatever they want. So it does come down to Washington, D.C. and how serious Donald Trump is about keeping them reined in. And look, I mean, we're just reading tea leaves here. It'd be easy to predict, right, one way or the other, that he could say, no, listen, I really mean it. We're going to go with plan C now, and it looks like this, and don't piss me off or whatever. On the other hand, I guess it's probably more likely is he's going to bend. He's going to do what he wants. I saw John Mearsheimer said, Trump's a fool if he thinks Netanyahu's going to go along with him. He'll do whatever he wants. And if Trump doesn't like it, well, he'll just sick the Israel lobby on him. You know? Now, I guess there's one caveat to that, which was it in the Wall Street Journal? I think it was in the Wall Street Journal. I read they had a big profile about Ron Dermer. And, we don't have any actual card-carrying neoconservatives in the Trump government, but Ron Dermer's pretty close. He's basically, an American-born, but an Israeli agent and working for Netanyahu here and coordinating all this policy with Trump and all that. But one of the main strategies of Ron Dermer over the last decade has been, let's just focus on the Republicans and, screw Barack Obama and the Democrats. We just really need the American right. And that has worked by and large, although it's starting to fail. But it has left them sort of stuck with Trump. They don't really have the Democrats to switch back to. And so that means if he tells them enough, they have the lobby to threaten him with. They could withhold born-again Christian votes and stuff like that. But they can't say, okay, well, that's fine because we still have the Democrats and we can always just Bill Clinton you like we did Bush Sr. or whatever, So they have that strategy, that Dermer strategy has left them in a little bit tighter spot than before. They can, on the Republican side, they can threaten those evangelical votes. And they can threaten to withhold money. But they can't really threaten the other party. And that was, for a very long time, for many decades, that was AIPAC's strategy, was to keep a lock on both parties so that the American people have nowhere to go.
Yeah. And I think you highlighting Dermer is really important. He is, I believe, Netanyahu at this point, his closest confidant. Reuters reported that he's an every day or certainly every week figure in the White House. So he's constantly there. He was born in the U.S., so he doesn't speak with an accent. I'm sure he really appeals to the Trump administration. And it's important to remember that after October 7th, Netanyahu tasked Dermer with a plan to remove the Palestinians from Gaza. And he said that we have to make life there so unbearable that the other Arab states will take in the Palestinians as an act of charity. Because after all, they've refused to do so forever because out of support for the Palestinian people, not to aid their ethnic cleansing, their genocide from their homeland. And so if they did that, they would be supporting that. And so now that, you make it so that every single Palestinian is just begging to leave, please, my child has an amputated arm, they're growing, they need to have somewhere where they can have surgeries and regular medical treatment. At that point, the Arab states would then welcome it and would take in the Palestinians. And so I think
sick, but true. I mean, that's exactly right.
Yep.
But that's their strategy. It's like, well, once their child's amputated limb starts growing, they're going to need some special surgeries. We'll cleanse them that way. Yeah, that's the thinking. All right. I mean, it has been. Yeah, it's really incredible. There's that clip going around. I almost tweeted it, but then I kind of held my fire a little bit because there is a weasel word in there. Is Trump talking to the Fox News lady, Maria, I don't know how to say it, starts with a B. And he's talking about essentially the Kushner plan about cleansing all the Palestinians out of there and turning the entire Gaza Strip.
Chris actually has this clip loaded up, so let's just play it real quick, and then I'll let you explain why it's so important.
Could be developed, and you said you wanted to develop it.
Well,
do you have plans for that?
Not me as an individual.
The U.S.
I liked it as like Freedom Place. You call it Freedom Place, and we would get all of the people that live there into decent homes throughout the region. If you look, Egypt has a lot of land. Jordan has a lot of land, you know, right next door. A lot of countries have a lot of land. So I had an initial vision that we would get them. Look at Gaza. I mean, you know, there's nothing standing. The whole thing it's all rubble. So it's not too hard to top that.
So Scott, why is that so important?
Okay, well, I mean, first of all, it just goes to show the absolute genocidal intent there, just openly stated, absolute, you know, war crime in violation of Article 46 of the Fourth Geneva Convention about, you know, removing a population and bringing a new population in to steal their property and all of that. So it's just blatantly illegal, criminal. But also, though, I thought it was notable, the weasel word in there was, so my initial plan, right? It sounded to me like he's already, you know, they still have that in mind that, gee, they would like to, but it sounds like he's actually come to the recognition, as we talked about when he first said, oh yeah, we're going to remake the whole thing as a big Riviera. Like, yeah, you and which Marine Corps are going to do that? Because that's what it would take, would be the full force of American infantry on the ground there to go in there and essentially clean the entire area out of all fighting age males and cleanse the population out of there, force them into Egypt at bayonet point. The IDF doesn't have the manpower to do it. And they got tunnels and rubble to hide in. And so it would be an absolutely brutal, I guess, anti-insurgency campaign there to try to eradicate them. And then they tried, as you have done such a great job of covering at the Libertarian Institute, they've done everything they could to try to get the Libyans, the Sudanese, the Ethiopians, the Somalis, the Indonesians, the Madagascarians, is that how you say that? Anyone to take the Palestinians, and no one will go along with it. Of course, the Egyptians. No one will go along with it, as you said, because that's out of support for the Palestinians, to not help the Israelis complete their cleansing and genocide of their society out of the strip there. So it sounded to me like, and I didn't see I just saw that same clip. I did not see the entire conversation there. I don't know if they just changed the subject from there or what, but it seemed important to me that the way he said initial plan there, I inferred that he's climbing down from that and recognizing that they're not going to be able to do that. The Palestinians are not going to give up, dude, and they still got rifles, so that's it. All they got to do is not lose, and they didn't lose. So now you can start it all over again. Keep killing civilians, and he keeps talking big, and you notice he's got all these weasel words. Well, we'll go in there and clear them out. Oh, I mean, when I say we, I don't mean we, but, you know, someone will. Oh, really? Yeah, he has no plan for what to do with these people. You know, I guess he could, you know, spray them with sarin. He could drop an atom bomb, but then that gets radiation poisoning all over his beloved Israelis. So, you know, he has no real plan for what to do with the Palestinian people there. So, but it does go to show the absolute lunatic intent. And think of the rationalizations there. Oh, geez, their whole strip is destroyed. If you give them anything anywhere else, it's pretty easy to top their current situation. Yeah, but he's the one who did it. I mean, mostly Joe Biden, but still, he has helped them do this for the last many months. You know, what is it? It's 10 months into the into his administration here, and so he bears, you know, absolute, not absolute, but he bears a ton of responsibility for that, of course. And then he wants to use that as an excuse and say that, oh, all he wants to do is help these poor people by giving them a nice place to live, you know, in Jordan or somewhere like that, somewhere else, which is just nuts. I mean, I can't even believe that this is the president of the United States talking, and this is the current situation here, but it is what it is, Kyle. I don't know.
Yeah, I think my concerns, guys, because you're absolutely right that there's no way to just remove the fighting age males, and the IDF isn't prepared for that level of combat to even, you know, cleanse them that way. My real concern is that Netanyahu is going to use a stranglehold of food and just deprive the people of Gaza. I think he basically, the only metric that he has to worry about is that he goes too far and the pictures of starving children are too much for Donald Trump. As long as Donald Trump will stomach it, and even if the rest of the world is crying and complaining, hell, in some way, I think that almost helps the Netanyahu cause, because Trump sees all of his enemies, the Europeans and the liberals in the United States, being appalled by it. Then, he's like, oh, well, I don't like those people. It's almost like when Antifa kind of merged, or the Black Lives Matter took over immediately the cause of Palestinian life here in the United States. You saw a lot of people on the right kind of reflexively repel away from that. It took a lot of months, a lot of videos of dying Palestinian children before I think a lot of them finally came around and realized, no, this is an issue of the fringe lunatic left. And so I guess that's my concern, is that Netanyahu is going to use that leverage, and then we're going to just, I guess, really, really hope that Donald Trump Ivanka is going to show him some pictures of starving Palestinian children, and he'll just say enough.
Yeah. I think you're really onto something there, in terms of, people always use these weird phrases about 3 and 4D chess. It's just plain old chess. Like, okay, if I can get a reaction out of this guy and get him to move this way, well, then that'll set me up to move that way, and then that'll set him up to make a wrong move, and he'll zig when he should have zagged, and then we'll have him, right? Like, that's how the game is played. And so, yeah, I think that's right. In fact, I saw this really interesting lecture by this professor, Asian guy, maybe Japanese guy. Sorry, I forget his name. It was going around on the Twitter there. And he was explaining that, look, just go back and make all the historical examples of especially small and weak militarized states. They have all of these kind of rituals, including, severe hazing and group sex and torture and incest and animal abuse and child sacrifice. And a big part of doing that is to make everyone else hate them, in order to then reinforce that group solidarity, to say, see, everyone's against us. And, we talk a lot about the Christian end timesers who believe that if they, just, burn the red heifer and rebuild the temple and all that, then Jesus will come back and, we'll all get raptured and all this and that. But he was explaining that on the Jewish side of this same kind of end times belief there, that at least some factions of them have talked themselves into believing that at the end times, it will be a war of the whole world against Israel. So if they're turning the whole world against them more and more and more, think about that clip of Anna Kasparian just yelling and screaming and saying the whole world hates you now and all that. That plays perfectly into what it is that they want, so that they can say, of course, as anyone could anticipate, yeah, they just hate us for who we are. They hate us for our freedom. They hate us for our superiority. They hate us because we're just such great folks, and they suck, and they're jealous of us and all that stuff. The same kind of crap that they told us after September 11th. And that's what they tell the people of Israel. That's what the regime in Israel tells the people of Israel. So is to reinforce that group solidarity by deliberately encouraging that outrage by everyone else. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. That seems to fit with the current Israeli strategy to a great degree.
Yeah. So, Scott, we've been trying to read the tea leaves a little bit on, based on reports we're getting on Trump's relationship with Netanyahu, how he's looking at the ceasefire in Gaza. He was in some rare form today during his press conference with the Australian Prime Minister, and he had some comments on Gaza and Hamas, so I want to play those for you.
When you say we are going to eradicate Hamas, who is we? Does that include American boots on the ground?
No, it won't be on the ground at all. We don't need to, because we have many countries, as you know, signed on to this deal. The way I view it, 59 countries, and unanimous. There's never been, nobody ever believed it was countries that 4 months ago didn't like each other, and now they're all aligned together. I mean, we've had countries calling me when they saw some of the killing with Hamas, saying we'd love to go in and take care of the situation ourselves. In addition, you have Israel would go in 2 minutes if I asked them to go in. I could tell them, go in and take care of it. But right now we haven't said that. We're going to give it a little chance, and hopefully there will be a little less violence. But right now, they're violent people. Hamas has been very violent, but they don't have the backing of Iran anymore. They don't have the backing of really anybody anymore. They have to be good. And if they're not good, they'll be eradicated.
So, Scott, what Trump is saying here is that people saw the Hamas executions, and certainly that was brutal and disgusting, and that's why, I in no way support Hamas. And, this is an armed militia. This isn't some group of like revolutionaries trying to usher in a better society necessarily. And so there's that. And Trump is saying that there's countries calling him all the time saying that we're ready to go in. But he says that if Hamas doesn't cut it out, he's going to tell the Israelis that they could go back in. And so I'm just wondering if you think Trump is really on the verge of breaking the ceasefire over Hamas, fighting against other Palestinian groups and executing people, at least accused of committing crimes.
Well, I mean, yeah, like we were talking about before, I'm afraid I would not be surprised if he just goes ahead and flip-flops right back. The Israelis got their hostages out, so then who gives a damn what happens to the Palestinians now that they have no more shields, Israeli shields to protect them. Not that that was ever much protection during this thing. So, no, I would not be surprised. I would note that just a few days ago, there was a clip of him saying, well, you have to understand, there's some really bad guys over there, and we have an agreement with Hamas that they're allowed to round these guys up and shoot them. He didn't say exactly that, but virtually that.
Yeah.
And we know who these guys are. It's this group, Abu Shabab. I know you've covered this in depth for the Institute over the past time. It was Avigdor Lieberman, and I think Netanyahu, or at least his spokesman, officially admitted this, but it was Avigdor Lieberman, the former defense minister, the secular right-wing nationalist, who accused Netanyahu of supporting these groups, and then it was all over the Israeli media that was true, and that they're tied to the Islamic State. So here Netanyahu says Hamas is ISIS, when in fact they are at least one solid clique to the more chill than the Islamic State, for God's sake, who are, as apocalyptic as any cult in the world, and, circa 2013 through 17 there. These guys are tied to them, like the guys who are essentially the most radical of the bin Ladenites in the world. And they're just an armed criminal gang that the Israelis were supporting just to divide and conquer against, or to, divide and weaken against Hamas. So yeah, one, there's no surprise that Hamas is doing this. Two, yeah, of course, they're not holding trials. I mean, they're all living in a giant pile of rubble. And so, do we all frown upon extrajudicial assassinations and all of this? Of course. But is Hamas killing bin Ladenites, or at least alleged bin Ladenites, a reason for America to support Israel breaking the ceasefire and starting the war all over again? I mean, this is, I can't be on Twitter, man. I was on there yesterday. I just saw over and over and over again all of these hawks. Oh yeah, the most genocidal lunatics in all of American society. They all of a sudden care so much about the Palestinians, as long as they're members of the Islamic State. And when Hamas is putting guys from IS on their knees and shooting them in the head, they go, oh no, the Palestinian people. Who's going to protect the Palestinian people from Hamas? We have to support Israel going in there and bombing them again. I mean, is anyone dumb? I mean, I get it that that's the best Hezbollah talking points they can come up with for the day. But is anyone dumb enough for that to work on them? That this is why Hamas has to be stopped for killing Al-Qaeda guys? ISIS guys, where even Trump himself acknowledged that a couple days ago, that's what we're talking about here is, and again, rewind. Why does Hamas rule the Strip anyway? Because George W. Bush and Ehud Olmert made it that way. Well, Ariel Sharon and Ehud Olmert, they made it that way. Hamas is not the government of the Strip. They are the most powerful gang in an Israeli prison. And it was Shin Bet and Mossad and the IDF who built up Hamas in the first place as a right-wing religious alternative to the PLO. And that began in the late 1980s and continued all the way through. And Netanyahu said repeatedly before October 7th that this is how we thwart a Palestinian state. For anyone who, I know people already know this, they already know this. For anyone who doesn't know this, they said in their own words over and over and over again, we support Hamas in the Gaza Strip so that we can tell the Americans and the Europeans and the Tel Aviv liberals to shut their traps. We have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to negotiate with a bunch of terrorists, do you? But they're the ones who put the terrorists there. So they have that cheap excuse. And then, as Netanyahu said, well, I control the height of the flame. Don't worry. Yes, they're dangerous, but I know what I'm doing. and I'll protect Israeli society from the terrorist enemy that I am foisting on the poor people of Palestine. So now tell me how responsible the Palestinians are that through some absolutely perverse theory of popular sovereignty, that again, more they must suffer for the sins of Hamas. Even though, again, this is, at least on the face of it, Hamas taking out guys who even the Israeli regime itself admits are tied to the Islamic State.
Yeah. So Scott, this is actually like the perfect segue into my last question for you. In the past week or so, I've only heard one person make this comparison. Sagar and Jetty has said that disarming Hamas in Gaza is maybe comparable to the de-Baathification of Iraq, in that they're going to basically create a whole security vacuum. And I'm not sure, maybe Matt Blumenthal would have some good sights into how fragmented Palestinian society in Gaza is, but people are desperate there. And there's obviously like these different clans and factions that do have ties to jihadist organizations in the case of Abu Shabaab and the popular forces there. So I wonder if maybe this is at disarming Hamas, removing Hamas from power, and then not having really any government to take over, any kind of legitimate authority to take over, is a way to create a state of anarchy, leading, of course, to civil war, because the people are entirely desperate and they're going to be fighting over food and aid and all other kinds of resources. So do you think the comparison holds up at all? And are you concerned about like a power vacuum and maybe some Palestinian group needing to be armed and hold power to make sure that when aid trucks come into Gaza, they get to the warehouses, so they get to the starving people and they aren't looted by the first desperate person who's willing to jump on the truck?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is they're not going to lay down their guns, right? They have RPGs and rifles, essentially. The Israelis, as you've covered, the Israelis admit they get all their bombs from unexploded ordnance. They drop so many bombs on these people that the duds are then enough for Hamas to arm themselves with. And so that's just not going away unless by their voluntary acquiescence. And, we're only at the very first stage of this deal. If they're going to continue to implement the deal, then there are going to have to be major compromises made. And I really don't know what's going to happen. I know that if we go back to maybe even a year ago, or not quite a year ago, they were talking about bringing in some kind of joint force under, I think it was Egypt and Saudi Arabia working together to sort of take over the Strip. And under that proposal, Hamas would stand aside but not disarm. But they would agree to essentially just go underground and let this new sort of civilian force take over the Strip to rebuild it and all that, while not agreeing to go away, which is, of course, the poison pill that they'll never agree to just completely dissolve and disarm. But then, of course, this runs up against the obvious trouble that the Israelis are never going to let the Arab states come in there and spend tens of billions of dollars rebuilding the Gaza Strip, rebuilding these 4 cities that they've destroyed for these people to live in. They're going to find a way to prevent that from happening unless Donald Trump really puts his foot down. And you'll know it when you see it, as in like Donald Trump on TV demanding the Israelis hold new elections and get rid of Benjamin Netanyahu and exile him to the island of Elb, till he dies of old age or something like that. A real clampdown. Otherwise, I mean, what can you say, man? Just on the face of it, the inertia here is for the continued destruction of these people. They're all going home now, but what? They're pitching a tent on a pile of rubble. But there's just, you got to admire their spirit. But eventually, and I guess essentially, they're dependent on the Israelis to feed them. They're completely captive. They're fish in a barrel, and the Israelis are going to do what they want with them. And I don't know, there is no force organized in the world to stop them, man. Outside of the president's ego, and he's 96% in the tank for them.
That's a great assessment of the situation. Scott, thank you so much for your time today. Your analysis is absolutely brilliant. Of course, your work at antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute, is absolutely essential for, the push against supporting Israel and all other kinds of mistakes the U.S. government is making every single day. So thank you so much. I hope you could come back on the show again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Anytime.